Is Germany about to close its borders? Ever since a Syrian refugee, apparently radicalized by Islamic State, attacked and killed random people at a festival in Solingen, politicians have been scrambling to reassure everyone that they are doing something, anything, to keep Germany safe. And one of the proposals is to have passport controls on all of the country's borders. And that's a pretty big deal because permanent border controls were actually abolished in the 1990s. This is because Germany is a signatory to the Schengen Agreement. Most, but not quite all EU countries are Schengen states, as are a few European countries that are not actually in the EU. Not only is Germany a Schengen state, but so are all of its neighbours, and so there are supposed to be no passport controls on any land border. But the Schengen Agreement does allow temporary border controls when necessary, and in fact there have been temporary checks on the Austrian border since 2015, and temporary checks on the Polish, Swiss and Czech borders since last year. The plan now is to have checks on all the borders temporarily. This doesn't necessarily mean fences and border guards with guns. It's more likely to mean spot checks at the busiest crossing points. For most travellers and commuters, this is likely to mean delays at least from time to time. But it has to be said that where passport checks are currently in place, we haven't seen many of the very long tailbacks we used to have before Schengen, when waiting times at border crossing points were a regular feature of travel news bulletins. Now, although Solingen was the incident that prompted this new policy, it's unlikely that it would have prevented it from happening. It is true that the suspect in this case avoided being deported back to Bulgaria until Germany became legally responsible for processing his claim. But these border controls might not have prevented him from entering Germany in the first place. More measures are required, and this is what German politicians are now arguing about. And tempers are clearly frayed, with the Chancellor and the leader of the main opposition each accusing the other of causing discussions to fail. Basically, the government, headed by Chancellor Scholz, invited the main opposition group, the Union, headed by Friedrich Merz, to discuss the issue and figure out a plan. But not long after talks began, Merz walked out, claiming that the government was simply not willing to do what was necessary. Scholz then claimed that Merz had no intention of working with the government and had wanted discussions to fail. He accused Merz of a lack of character, honesty and consistency, and of conjuring tricks and amateur dramatics. Ouch. Whether any of that is actually true, I can't say. But the basic argument is something like this. We do agree that we need to manage the numbers of people coming into the country. How do we actually do that? The opposition wants to see asylum seekers simply turned away at the border, and that's as simple as it sounds. If you're an asylum seeker, you won't be allowed to enter Germany. You will have to apply in the country where you first set foot in the EU. The government fears that this may actually be illegal. According to international treaties, you can't turn away people claiming asylum until you have at least looked at their case. The Union argues that EU law gives member states the right to act in the interests of their own security. In addition, the government argues that if you turn people away at the border, they're just going to sneak in some other way. What you need to do is to detain them, make sure they stay detained, and then use the legal mechanisms that already exist to return them to where they should be claiming asylum. So the government's proposal is to build detention centres near the borders and make sure that asylum seekers can't simply vanish when a deportation order comes through. In addition, they want the legal processes sped up so that we don't have issues with missed deadlines. Had all this been in place, it's extremely likely that the Solingen attacker would have been returned to Bulgaria years ago. If you want my personal take on this, I think this looks more like panic than rational decision-making. This is an issue on which governments seem to have been reacting to events and not thinking about the future. This seems to have been the norm since 9 years ago, when the reaction was, all these people fleeing for their lives and nobody is helping them. We have to let them in. And we did, but then we left it at that. Now the reaction is, these people are still coming in. Some of them are violent. Voters are now voting for anti-immigration parties. We have to send them all back. There was no thought to any possible consequences back then. and there still isn't now. I'm not sure this is the best way to deal with the situation, to be honest. It's certainly not the most effective. Here are a few things that I think do need to be urgently addressed. First, many refugees from war zones are likely going to be traumatized, and post-traumatic stress disorder is a serious problem that can manifest itself quite violently. These cases need to be identified and given the treatment that they need. Second, young people in this situation are easy prey for hate preachers who can radicalize them and manipulate them into committing violent acts. Now, I know that the government is making efforts to prevent that from happening, but clearly a lot more effort is needed. Third, if you are going to accept hundreds of thousands of people into the country during a housing crisis, actually do something about the housing crisis. If you don't, you're going to end up with a lot of frustrated citizens who, sooner or later, are going to blame immigration for the housing crisis. This is just the start, of course. There are many other problems that we really need to deal with. But it seems that at the moment, we're not doing anything at all until we're faced with something we simply can't ignore. And as a result of that, we are simply veering between humanitarian crises and political crises. Now, I know that a lot of you are going to disagree with many of the things that I've said in this video, but I think we can all agree on one thing. Veering between humanitarian crises and political crises is no way to run a country. Now, I don't normally beg for subscribers, but if you're not subscribed and you've made it this far into the video, then please do consider it. It would be much appreciated. Thank you.